Today's webinar, Why Today's Thought Leaders Are Going Digital, and What This Means for Medical Affairs. We're excited you could join us. My name is Megan Billingsley, and I'll be moderating today's event. Today, we're going to talk about how scientific discussion is going online. This is a trend that was underway even before the COVID-19 pandemic, but the events of the past few years have greatly accelerated the shift. Key opinion leaders are increasingly choosing digital channels, including social media, to disseminate their ideas and findings. Often they're able to reach larger or more diverse audiences this way than they could using more traditional forums like publications and medical congress presentations. In this webinar, we'll talk with credentialed medical experts with significant reach in the digital space, as well as an industry expert in the emerging field of social listening. We'll learn how and why opinion leaders have gone digital and discuss what this means for the future of scientific discussion. We'll also talk about what steps industry partners who are interested in deepening their relationships with digital opinion leaders should take when participating in online scientific exchange. We're thrilled to be joined by our speakers, Viet Le, Associate Professor of Research, Preventative Cardiology, PA, Intermountain Health; Charlie Lees, Consultant Gastroenterologist, University of Edinburgh, Western General Hospital; and Scott Thompson, Co-Chief Executive Officer, Acceleration Point. Before we get started, I have just a few housekeeping items. Please note the slides will advance automatically throughout the presentation. To enlarge the slide, click the Enlarge Slides button located in the top right corner of your presentation window. If you need technical assistance, click on the Help widget located on the bottom left corner of your console. We encourage you to submit questions at any time throughout the presentation using the Q&A widget at the bottom of your console. We will try to answer these during the webcast, but if a fuller answer is needed or we run out of time, it will be answered later via email. Please know we do capture all questions. So to kick us off, I'd like to ask each of our speakers just to provide a quick introduction of themselves and their work. So Viet, we'll start with you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm Viet Le. I'm at Intermountain Health as a preventive cardiology PA, but also an associate professor of research. And I do some part-time faculty work. Currently, I'm working on my doctorate, PA specific, in healthcare leadership and health professions education.
Thank you and welcome. Charlie, you as well.
Hi, everybody. My name's Charlie Lees. I'm a gastroenterologist in Edinburgh, where I work both as a consultant in the hospital and also as professor at the university, running a research program and a clinic looking after people with Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. And increasingly, I spend a lot of my time lecturing to clinicians and academics, but also direct patients via a number of different multimedia channels.
Excellent. Welcome, Charlie. And last but not least, Scott.
Hi, thanks for having me on. Scott Thompson. I'm the co-chief executive officer of Acceleration Point. I have been working with medical affairs teams for about 10 years, helping them learn from the world's top doctors and take what they learn to apply to strategy. So really excited to be able to spend time with Charlie and Viet today to learn how this is moving online.
Wonderful. Thank you, Scott. I'm excited for this discussion. So just to kick us off, Viet and Charlie, both of you are active on social media, and both of you have built up pretty significant numbers of followers. So why do you choose to participate in the scientific discussion that takes place on these forums? Viet, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I guess my origin story is a little bit accidental. It wasn't like I was dumped into a vat or anything like that, but one of our PR marketing folks at Intermountain had asked me to try this Twitter platform. And this was 2014. I still at that point had not heard of Twitter, had not used it. But really what he wanted was an organic approach to my presence at a scientific conference. And at the American Heart Association 2014, he said, look, just tell us what you're thinking as you're going through this scientific session, as you're at panels, presenting and attending the poster sessions. And what happened from there was really a wonderful way to interact with those poster presenters, panelists at sessions. And in particular, as I've been publishing and presenting our work, to really present or to interact with folks online beyond those publications. So it's kind of fun actually to go and you know, give people a sense of what it's like to be at a conference. If they're at home, a lot of my colleagues cannot attend the same conferences, and yet this is important information. So that was kind of my introduction into all of this.
Yeah, so for me, it's evolved quite naturally over time. I stepped onto Twitter back in 2010. There weren't many people doing this back then. I wanted to share some of the content I was creating just for talks, sharing images of PowerPoint slides, but also to report to the community what was going on at conferences and meetings. And it's evolved over time into much more of a, knowledge exchange with multiple stakeholders. I now engage with clinicians, academics, folks with industry, quite a lot of patients on a variety of different platforms. And the space has now become very busy. And my work there, I think, really has continued to evolve, as we'll discuss. But it's being there and evolving with the community and with the technology that's been there and using it as a way to share ideas. And really, for me, I guess at its core, there's this piece about thought leadership, but also this piece really about building community, global community for, in my case, the gastroenterology field, and in particular, for patients, healthcare providers, academics, industry, and policyholders with respect to inflammatory bowel disease.
Excellent. Thank you. I like hearing how your usage of the channels has evolved over time. And just as a follow up question, Charlie, you even mentioned that you're on multiple platforms. So, which digital channels or social media platforms are you active on? And how did you go about building your presence there? Yeah, we'll start with you.
Oh yeah, sure. There are many different platforms, as you know, and each of them have their own philosophies. As I mentioned, I've been on Twitter since 2014, and I think for me that has been one of the better platforms for interactions, at least real time. It's interesting to me how quickly a conversation can develop in a thread. I am also on Instagram, although for Instagram, it doesn't lend a lot to being able to interact with folks. That's like, I have some information, I'll just present it. That seems to be the Instagram way. LinkedIn, I find, is somewhat similar to Twitter, but it's a conversation that can be a little bit more elaborate and go over several days, if not weeks, as people discover your LinkedIn posts. But I do enjoy the different platforms. You just have to have the right mindset for the audiences. I cross post, and so it's kind of funny to see the different interactions that I get. If I post a LinkedIn, it goes to Twitter, and how many people actually watch it and interact with it versus another.
Yeah, so I can follow on from that. Twitter's been the mainstay. I've grown my following there to about 14,000 just now. That's just evolved fairly organically over time. But it's an interesting platform. I mean, all of the platforms will give you data that comes back. You can see what resonates with your audience, what generates conversations and discussions and, and interest. Beyond that, I think YouTube and LinkedIn have been underrated in the profession. It gives the ability to expand thought more and to reach different audiences. And in the last months, I've been using Substack to generate very easily, in fact, a newsletter that goes out sometimes regularly, sometimes a bit more sporadically, called Atomic IBD. And over the last 2 or 3 years, the sort of learnings that I myself have gone on is really to learn and hone the craft of digital writing and communication styles, because it's a very different technique than you would if you were writing an academic paper or a review article, what have you. And so my behavior's evolved a bit over time. I don't tweet very much direct from conferences now, or at least not this was presented or this was presented, because there are a lot of people that are doing that, a lot of people that are doing that really very well, but often with commentary. And for me, where this really steps up a level is not only using these different digital media to take different pieces of content and bring them into a new way of life by building a narrative, storytelling, getting the attention, and then engaging with your audience in this two-way. But it's also about that commentary aspect. And I think as a digital opinion leader in the space, what people really look for and appreciate is the person that's prepared to not just post, but to post something that's new, that's come from elsewhere, and provide some commentary on it. How does it fit into context? What does it mean? What might it mean? Or what's going to happen? Where's the unmet need? What's the gap, etc. So that's how things have evolved from me, and the technology and the platforms continues to move forwards. And with that, I look to continue to iterate what I do and try to improve with the data and the feedback that comes with these platforms.
And if I may, I really enjoyed what Charlie just said, because I think one of the things that I did often at the very beginning, as you're building your presence, was to tweet at conferences. I still do that, especially if I attend late breaking trials that are that I'm passionate about, the areas of therapeutics that really resonate with me. But what I found is even more interesting nowadays, as Charlie has said, there's so many people who are just posting things, and they already, I shouldn't say just, because they do craft them, and actually they're very detailed and quite professional looking. What I like to do is go back through those and then give my take on it, or even poke a little bit at the original poster to see if they have deeper or in-depth insights into what they've already created as a thread. I do like that you can take these social media platforms and curate them. And by that, I mean, you choose your followers, or not your followers rather, but who you follow. And from there, you begin to develop a thread or a stream or live feed that comes in. And, of course, that can become overwhelming, but I find that for those that we're speaking to, that's something to consider is I find it's like a pick and choose newsletter or newspaper where you follow the journalist and article writer rather than the paper itself.
Mm.
Excellent. Thank you both. I'd like to bring Scott into the conversation for just a moment and ask, would you say that the behaviors that Charlie and Viet are describing using social, are these typical? Is there even a typical when it comes to why thought leaders and digital opinion leaders are choosing to engage in discussions across digital channels today?
Yeah. I don't know if I would call it typical yet. I think that what I'm hearing Charlie and Viet say is a bit on the leading edge of where we're going to see more digital exchange happen. I am seeing across our Quello analytics, the size of contributions increasing. So they're not just reporting the weather. This happened. This happened. They're actually more commentary about their thoughts on it, why it's happening, what the implications could be, and even posting questions to solicit more two-way scientific exchange. And then what's also interesting is, I mean, while both of you have clearly built a large number of followers, the impact goes so far beyond the followers that you have. I mean, if I look through some of our analytics, you've got almost 900,000 people that will see what you say online. And Charlie, I mean, it's up over 2 million for you. And as we've been looking, often 25 to 30% of digital opinion leaders in the medical space have other HCPs following them. So, that element that Charlie mentioned about community, specifically at the HCP level, does seem to be alive, but I think we're still looking to a few to provide the engine for that community to exist, while others are still kind of in the participation mode.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And going back to Viet and Charlie, have the kinds of discussions that medical experts are having on social platforms and other digital channels, have they changed over the past few years? Is there, as Scott referenced, more of a two-way dialogue today?
I think so. As I said, it kind of depends on the platform that you choose to post to. But I feel like there are a lot of memes on this where folks will break down the different platforms and what it's like to say, well, I took a picture of my donut and that's what I post on Instagram. Facebook is how I ate my donut or whatever. But I think as you think of how I originally posted to Twitter in 2014, I felt like I was kind of there on my own a little bit. And now it's become so much more rich, the depth of the conversations and the back and forth. Of course, you have to avoid the trolls. I just don't respond. But to people who are curious, I feel like the exchange is very rewarding to the point that we've developed collaborations and research. And, I'm invited to come talk with folks. And so it's been enriching to me anyways. And I think that's a space that still is untapped.
Yeah, I would echo all of those comments, but perhaps just to add a slight counterpoint here, which is something that I try to teach, certainly to my fellows and residents as they're embarking in this space, but more broadly too. And that's to be very, very aware of your passive audience. So Scott talks about the reach that I have with, about 14,000 followers on Twitter, reaching up to 2 million people. Now, not everyone sees everything that you post, far from it. But you do need to bear in mind that there's a whole level of people here who have eyes on your content and they're not engaging. So they're not following you, or they might be following, but they're not liking, they're not retweeting, they're not commenting. And largely that falls into two very important categories. First, I think, are those folks that work in industry where they're governed by a different set of regulations that are pretty strict in terms of how they are able to, or actually not able to, interact and engage with HCPs on social platforms. And that varies. You'll see much more engagement on LinkedIn, for example, which is a slightly more closed community for that exchange, but zero on Twitter. And then the other really important group is patients. And I bear in mind that everything that I write and post on any platform will be viewed by not just fellow clinicians and academics, but also by a large number of people working in industry and a large number of patients, and potentially a very large number of patients, depending on what you're writing. And these people are global, don't forget. And so that means you need to be careful not to produce and publish a bite-sized piece of content that is prone to misinterpretation, taken out of context. And so you can be in trouble if you're not careful, where you lose the nuance, particularly in some of these platforms like Twitter, where you're very space constrained. And so what I've been trying to do is to then use other platforms like my email newsletter or LinkedIn, perhaps, where you can be more long form, or YouTube, where you can provide a written and video commentary, just to produce the context and nuance, etc., that's there. So I think this is pretty important. But otherwise, this knowledge exchange, this community building, I think is an increasingly powerful way that we can engage across domains for the good of society, really.
Absolutely. Charlie, both of you mentioned this idea of cross posting, and, with each channel having its own strengths, its own limitations. I do find that, the best strategies, whether it's for you or even for some of our industry partners who now also have who do have their own Twitter handles and their own social media posting accounts, is to make sure that they're using each of those in the best way, and then using others to make people aware. So they might post, something long form in some type of portal for medical education, videos, things like that, and then use Twitter to make people aware of it, or vice versa. So I really believe in this idea of use each platform that's good at.
Yeah. I like it, just kind of leaning on what you said, a traditional format that we're used to as a publication. So you have the actual full publication, but you have the abstract, the shorter portion of it that unfortunately folks can probably do a lot of interpretation in an abstract where they didn't read the full publication. But But I would say that LinkedIn is kind of your manuscript, and Twitter is a way to inform folks, hey, come read the longer form of what I'm saying, and give a, 280. Of course, I think the 140 characters was better to keep people more concise back in the day. But in any case, that's kind of how I think of the cross posting as well. Is LinkedIn is where I can really delve into something, and as it crosses over. In fact, when I develop a LinkedIn post, I think of those first 100 to 120 characters as the ones that will cross over to Twitter anyway. So I tell people up front what I want to say, and then go into depth later in my post in LinkedIn.
Excellent points. Thank you all. Charlie and Viet, do you ever have concerns that HCPs will hear what's being said online about new data or studies and not go back to the source data, so rendering the conversations more superficial or less nuanced?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it follows a bit what Viet was saying before about people just reading the title, the abstract, and not delving into the full paper. I mean, people are busy. People's attention spans across the whole of society are for consuming content are actually shifted because of these platforms and the way people use them in their everyday life. And I think that's just a reality. And so, whilst there are definitely significant number of people that are still keeping themselves very up to date by reading all of the literature very thoroughly, the reality is that many people are not. They're just too busy with patient care and their lives, and they may just skim through things anyway. So I think we should be mindful of this. I think there are certain sort of landmark papers where you can really highlight to people and explain what's in there and provide, different ways in which people can engage with the content. So I think that's important. And then there's the sort of the overarching piece, the sort of review type article, the traditional review article that might have, 300 or 400 detailed references in the bibliography that people may read once, they may skim through, even then might be quite impenetrable to some people. So I think there is scope with these new digital media tools that we have to us that are distributed and really very democratic, because anyone with an internet connection can reach them, to bring this information to life, to bring it out from the back of a wall and actually give it a different type of voice. And then it's consumed by people in a way that just wouldn't happen otherwise. I think to me, that's where the real benefit is. But of course, to your original point, we do need to be mindful of some of the pitfalls too.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. We must be on the same wavelength, even though multiple hours and a lot of thousands of miles apart. I was thinking of the democratization of data, and getting things out from behind paywalls. Companies need to be paid, but I do think that it's helpful to, as a thought leader, or I don't know that I consider myself as a thought leader. I just happen to read things and have opinions. But I recognize there are many that cannot get behind the paywall and are not able to get to the full manuscript or publication. And so I think it's a teaser. On one hand, I try to do my best to make sure that I'm not misinterpreting the information. I will state when something's my commentary versus what the data is that I'm giving. And so that's helpful. I kind of come back to what you said, Charlie, the passive audience. There are many folks that I know personally who I end up going to conferences, and it's always surprising when a post, they tell me, oh, I really enjoyed your such and such posts or your threads that you've done. And yet I can recall like maybe one or two likes. And yet multiple people will say and highlight that post. And I think, why didn't you like it? Or what? I don't understand. And so it's an interesting thing, that passive audience. And maybe I'm kind of that way as I look at Yelp reviews. I'm not one to like or give 4 or 5 stars on things, but I read the reviews or I read a post. So in many ways, I'm kind of that passive audience as well. But I do coming back to the democratization, I think it is important for us as thought leaders and, those that are on this webinar to recognize that what we do post you have to be careful as to how it will be interpreted, and it'll spin out on a life of its own. That so-called viral moment can be good or bad, no matter the intention when you first post it.
I'd love to just add that I think that the fact that the two of you and others kind of like you are using these channels is encouraging, because no longer are we going to be able to trust the source. We have to trust the author. And so having a background, like I would much prefer Viet or Charlie to, I'd love to hear your thoughts on science versus getting it from Chat GPT, where, who knows how it came up with that, and it's not always accurate. And, no matter what Chat GPT says, it says it with the utmost confidence as if it's 100% accurate without any reference to the bottom of how it came to that. And so, I think that that's going to happen anyway. And so the more that we can have trusted people who are being followed, and that they're maintaining their integrity and their credibility around that, the better. And even some of the formalization agencies, like you can now get CME credits for participating in a tutorial, right? An online education, right? These bodies are trying to say, hey, this set of content is actually valid and important and been reviewed. So I think it is going to be an interesting balance of democratization along with maintaining understanding of the credibility of where it's coming from.
Excellent point. Thank you so much. I do want to ask, how are these discussions changing the way that medical science advances, and how are they helping to move the field forward? And I'd love to hear from each of you, but Scott, why don't you kick us off?
Sure. So I think that the volume is increasing dramatically. The formats are becoming ever more different. And I think the hardest part's going to be prioritizing what's most important and what's not. Right. So while I do think that a lot of our clients, a lot of folks in the life sciences space are interested in watching, I think that they're also curious about how to engage, how to make sure people are aware of the science that has been legitimatized through the publications, through the conferences, and that we're going to continue to see that group, as Charlie mentioned earlier, as one of those audiences, continue to try to find ways that are compliant and that are transparent to be involved in the conversation. I'd love to hear kind of what you guys think about that.
Yeah, I think that's right. And to follow on what I was saying earlier, I mean, there's a lot of information that's really, really great science and data and commentary and detailed review papers that's published. People might read it once, they might not, and then it kind of goes to sleep. And I really see this space as a new dimension by which we can bring the existing data set to life, add in new data points, and that then becomes the sort of discussion forum wherein academics, pharma, patients, the community, funders, policyholders can take that and see sort of a more tangible feel for what is going on and where there might be areas to invest, to test, to iterate, to help those sort of medical science advances that you asked about.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with both of those statements. I think the term that comes to mind I think in the past we've talked about is crowdsourcing. And what's interesting to me, I mean, a recent post that came through in my LinkedIn was an updated data analysis on host exam, which is a trial that looked at single antiplatelet therapies, right? Aspirin versus P2Y12 inhibitor. So it's just an antiplatelet. And it's interesting to me to see this in 2023 when I was introduced to it in 2012, this monotherapy idea from a study from 1996. So if you weren't online, who would dig for a paper or a study from 1996 I don't know, but bringing it forward and linking, the timeline together is one thing. Crowdsourcing that information is that folks will crowdsource what I know and I crowdsource what other people know. There's so many colleagues that I have that have actually published now these collaborations in New England Journal of Medicine, in the Journal of the American College of Cardiology, that they crowdsourced each other online. They're not using the online data, but they knew that they had interests together in a subject and then wrote papers based on that. And this is, I think this is where science is taking us, is that it's no longer siloed so much in pockets of you just happen to be in a department somewhere back east or in the UK. But because we're all online, we recognize, oh, other people are thinking about this. So it's changing that conversation because it's becoming real time and global all at once.
Those are great points. Thank you. And you've raised so many interesting points about the valuable roles that social and digital media are playing in scientific exchange today. Medical affairs teams are really interested in expanding awareness of science also and are curious about how they can use social media to do so. So let's start with some recommendations on how they can do this themselves in the social space. Charlie, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, this is interesting. And increasingly, I get asked about this from multiple different pharma folk. And it's like, tell me, how does this work? What do we do? Give us all the answers. And I don't know, actually. It's tricky. There's a lot of regulation in the space. The beauty of doing it independently is one can just be true to one's own core values and follow a certain sort of code of conduct that makes sense in terms of touching on all the things we talked about before, and disclosing conflicts of interest, which I think is really important to do in view of complete transparency. There's a sort of rich tradition of making increasingly digital media content with pharma partners, and co-creating something that is reviewed and balanced and all the rest of it. But directly engaging on the platforms and trying to help pharma answer these questions, I am not sure I know. I mean, it's something I've tended to stay away from largely.
Yeah. As I look around some of what people are doing, my biggest recommendation to them is to not try to push it too hard, right? I think that all the best partnerships, all the best collaborations started from an organic spot of, we have shared belief in a scientific path. We're working towards, improving patient outcomes, and you have to have that relationship before you can do anything digital or not digital. And then once you're there, having kind of that, continuing with that tradition of digital content to make content easier to understand, more accessible. I think we can still follow a lot of the same principles of disclosure, of transparency, of making sure it's accurate and fair. We can kind of carry some of those forward to the social space as we're making people aware that that content exists. So if you look on, on Twitter, if you look on other platforms, a lot of things that people were doing off of social media is starting to show up on social media. So at a Congress, it wouldn't be unnatural to engage with a thought leader to say, hey, could we interview you after the session and have you in a news outlet and just share your thoughts? I'm sponsoring it, but your thoughts are your own. Say what you want, right? I'm seeing the same thing on Twitter where somebody's saying, hey, I've been asked to attend these sessions, share with you my thoughts. I'm hashtagging it, sponsored by XYZ company. My thoughts are my own. Again, transparent, compliant, but I think if we kind of model those same, practices that took years to figure out, I think that it's a good place to start.
Excellent. Thank you so much. In addition to building their own social presence, how can medical affairs best partner with experts like yourselves to also expand awareness? Viet?
Yeah, I mean, I'll lean a little bit on what Charlie and Scott have just said with regards to how do medical affairs team even come about this. in the digital space. And I'm more open about this of collaborating in terms of disease education, certainly therapeutic areas for, pharma, for whether it's devices or pharmacological therapeutics. I think it's okay to partner, especially if you go on common grounds, which is really disease. And if you can teach about that, it teaches about awareness, and then your area of therapeutics kind of comes up. Serving currently as an president of the Academy of PAs in Cardiology, it is something that we entertain quite a bit. Actually, for me, there's so many disease states that aren't well. I shouldn't say educated, but they're not pushed out well enough or broadly enough to those that are our constituents or members within the APAC organization. And so I actually will actively reach out to my pharma partners and say, what webinars do you have? What kind of education or slide decks do you have that's fairly generic to the disease? And certainly, will of course cover the topic of where your therapeutic is. But what I would hate to do is spend a whole lot of my own time trying to create something that's already well crafted, has been visually appealing, the PR and marketing and everyone has put in. What I'd like to do is review it first and say, okay, is this something that is appropriate to my group? But I think it's okay to partner with organizations, with associations, with those that are considered thought leaders, to be able to help push out content, but in a transparent manner. Allow us to also editorialize a little bit here, because I think that is full transparency, to go ahead and partner, but allow the organizations to provide their own commentary on things.
Yeah, those are interesting perspectives. On the slight aside, I mean, unlike Viet, I love the process of creating the media content and crafting visuals and and words, and looking at the whole narrative arc of what I'm saying. With respect, working with farmers, we're talking about here, I think as long as conflicts of interest are discussed and disclosed, that we are mindful of the rules of engagement with pharma generally, and then the rules on social media, as I think we've discussed. And then within that, if we are careful to frame the conversations in the right way, then there is a space and a need to educate people generally about new therapeutics and new treatment strategies, and all these different angles, and to have a working relationship that does that. So I think that's my take on it overall, perhaps slightly more nuanced than what Viet was saying, but yeah, I think that there's a need for good quality education, and there's a lot of very poor education that's put out there, not by pharma people, but just by sharks and charlatans. That actually, if we're not careful, that's where patients and professionals will get their information or their misinformation from. And so working together to ensure that we have enough sensible voices that are creating good quality, rigorous, well referenced and reviewed content is, I think, important. And then when we can layer on top of that expert commentary, label it as such, I think we're in good stead.
I couldn't say it better, Charlie. I think if there's something important to share, that's the first step. And then two, to bring our strengths. And if our partners in pharma and medical affairs are really good at creating content, let's partner with them on that, as long as we have the ability to keep our commentary clear and our own, right? So that we can maintain our integrity and our perspective, and that it's all transparent.
Excellent. Thank you all so much. I would like to shift to some audience questions. So, just to take a few here off the top, do you think today's social media conversations are changing the role of peer reviewed publications, or impacting what's being published? And if so, how?
I think if I take that first, I think yes and no. I think the good proactive journals are embracing social platforms by producing with authors visual abstract, which is very common now, that helps bring something to life. That's been very much done with social sharing in mind, and increasingly producing short podcasts, both audio and video. I, I think some of that's working really well. Some of it's working slightly less well, and the scope for improvement. Feels like there's a lot of sort of amateur work in that space still, and relatively straightforward to improve that. In terms of what's actually being published, I don't see a massive shift yet. I would like to think that more imaginative work and better idea generation through sharing, as we've discussed in depth, through social channels will infiltrate into better research, better writing, better communication overall, and some of that will filter into peer-reviewed publications. But I don't think there's a fundamental shift on what's being published yet.
Yeah, I would agree. It's not, it's not on the front end where the publications are being reviewed currently that any change is occurring. There are a lot of conversations and even a couple of publications since that have discussed peer review and whether it should change or how it should change. So that's an ongoing conversation in and of itself. I do think where I've seen some traction is the Retraction Watch group, which will go back through and have an open peer review process. Not that it's intentional or structured or formal or anything like that, but folks will point out errors in papers that have been published. And then there's, a formal kind of push to retract some of those that probably should not have been published in the first place, or at least have been more highly reviewed and looked at before they were published. So I think that's probably where I've seen the change.
Just one other point that comes to mind. I think the much bigger disruptor to conventional peer-reviewed literature is going to be generative AI, and I think this is iterating so fast at the moment, with compounding in the evolution of the technology, taking this at a really fast rate. We're going to see the shifts there much more so than I think we will through distributed digital media across social platforms.
Yeah, I agree.
Great point. Thank you. Our next question asks, are you concerned about the speed with which misinformation can spread on social channels? And I know that we talked about this a little bit today. What can be done to combat falsehood and inaccuracies?
Yeah, I'm worried about it. I think we all are. It depends in all manner of different policy and healthcare, social policy, whatever. But I think we can take the points we've talked about before, have good voices, producing good content, offering robust commentary, being as transparent as possible, and trying to educate people about how to be aware of misinformation. But it's one of the main reasons why I'm in the space, to be, hopefully as truly authentic and reliable a voice as I can to help combat a lot of the misinformation. Just one very small example or a big example in my field, and that's patients with inflammatory bowel disease getting dietary information online. And there is an enormous amount of noise and misinformation in that space, and trying to combat that is just one small task.
Yeah, I would say that in analogous areas in my space in preventive cardiology is statins. Wow, what a lightning rod for a lot of folks with regards to, lipid lowering it and whether that's even good. I would come back to what Charlie said earlier, which is, creating content that can be vetted, that's genuine, that uses folks that are perhaps educated in the space. But in the absence of us, then information will be created. It will be created by a whole host of folks that have an idea and an opinion. So I think it is important that we proactively create education. And that's one of the reasons why I am proactive at reaching out to my industry partners to see what they have, because I want to actively create information that folks can feel comfortable, have been looked at by experts and reviewed, and that we feel comfortable partnering in transparency, editorializing when we need to, because in the absence of that, things will fill in that space, all sorts of things. And Charlie will tell you that the dietary information that comes out is enormous. And it's confusing. It's confusing to patients in our community, what's right, what's wrong, where the data comes from. So I think it is important for us to be ahead of it, whether we combat it directly. I think there's more energy to create intentionally, and it's harder to combat things. I try not to even address misinformation specifically because you fall into a rabbit hole.
Bea and Charlie, I have a question for you. So, as this, in order to combat misinformation, I think we covered earlier that having reasonable, sensible voices who are credentialed, who have experience in this, is going to be important, right? That you have to combat it with share a voice that is meaningful. How do others get involved if this is a space that they're not comfortable in, right? If this isn't something that they've spent 8 years, 9 years learning and they want to get started tomorrow, how would you suggest they start?
Yeah, I mean, there's an old proverb which I'm probably going to mash up, but if the best time to plant a tree was, and I would just encourage people, if they're interested, to start, not to worry about being perfect. If you want to write online, then that's a good way to start on different platforms. Start by commenting on other people's posts. There are multiple different ways we could talk about strategies for growth. If you want to start making video content, just start recording stuff on your iPhone and posting it. Many people have vast amount of information that they're carrying around in their heads, vast amount of expert information that I think actually the world would be better if they shared more broadly. And we now have the ability to do that with these incredible platforms that have, that are changing the dialogue that we have. And so I would say to people, you have very little to lose. And, your community in particular has a lot to gain, particularly, I think, for some older people who have that wisdom and voice of not just authority, but years of experience that can really help lend a gravitas and an oversight and, a sense of perspective that can get lost. I love it when you see, an older professor dipping their toes for their first time. And so I would just say, go for it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think in my own facility and in my own department, I have several colleagues that they're kind of anxious, they're nervous about going on to a social media platform. And I usually tell them, start by just create the account, curate it, find people you want to follow, or, organizations and societies that you already belong to. And that will give you the experience of how others are posting and crafting, their knowledge to be able to present. And then just as Charlie said, go ahead and do what you would normally do if you were amongst residents or fellows or med students or anyone, is take a topic you're passionate about or a recent publication and begin to give your points on it. What is your commentary? And that way they're comfortable because it's something they already know how to do.
Mhm.
It's just a new format for them to do it in.
Excellent. Thank you. This next audience question is kind of a good follow up to that. What advice would you have for MSLs and medical affairs teams who are trying to build new strategies for social media engagement for the future? But to take it one step further, how can pharma professionals remain compliant while also engaging successfully?
Yeah. I think we covered a lot of that along the way. Transparency, purpose is definitely the starting point. I think that a lot of medical affairs teams will have this perception that if they're going to get involved, it means that you got dozens of MSLs tweeting all the time, and I don't think that's the case. I don't ever see that. What it probably means, what I find most teams are doing well, is it starts by listening and learning. So do find people like our guests here who are doing this on purpose, who have an audience and who are strong, relevant voices. Listen and learn, right? And then from there, start with engagements and relationships the way you would any other thought leader that you were going to engage with. Start by introducing yourselves, making sure there's alignment between your philosophies, and share your science, get insights, and then over time that may lead to something more in the digital space where instead of collaborating on a video in a portal, you might collaborate on a tutorial or a online journal club discussion, something. But it has to start with that foundation, and keep your compliance teams engaged from the beginning, right? Make sure that it's really clear what you're trying to do and why, and that it is following a lot of the principles that we've all talked about on this session.
Excellent. Thank you. Next question. Did you follow a specific strategy in order to build your following on social media? And do you recommend that other HCPs and thought leaders do the same?
Interesting question. I mean, you can, if you want to grow your following, there are multiple effective ways to do that. It depends on the platform. It depends on what you're doing, and it depends on your stage, and it depends on where you're at right now in terms of the algorithms and how things are working. And so you can geek out on this properly. There are multiple different good places to get advice on this. YouTube's great if you want to find out that there are multiple people that will tell you. In terms of growth, I think the first thing is you have to start. The second thing is if you want to grow is to post consistently, make comments on people with high impact accounts and followers. That will allow you to get visibility, particularly if you have sensible things to say. Develop a voice, consistency, and I think those are probably the main things. Actually, being yourself, being authentic, and being consistent. And look for the data, right? Every single tweet or post or video or image that you post is a data point. That data point will come back with number of views, number of likes, number of comments, number of retweets, etc. And that's not the only metric, but it will help you realize what's resonating with your audience and what is not. And that you can use as a basis for growth.
Yeah, and I would add that fantastic, by the way. Those are great tips. And I think all of those resonate with me in terms of since 2014, what's happened through my presence online is exactly those things that you list. I would say that as I watch up and coming thought leaders, it's been fun to watch them. They will pick an area that they're passionate about rather than just kind of wholesale shotgun approach. They will find a niche or niche, however you want to say that, but they'll find a space and really get good about the data and the science in that area. And they will post. And as Charlie said, you find those other thought leaders that are impactful in that space, and you post with them, tag them, find their posts and comment on them. In particular, don't be critical, but have a conversation. And I think that certainly grows your presence online.
Yeah, I agree. Niching down is very, very important. And if you want to grow, most of our disease areas are that they're not particularly rare disease, or even if they are, don't be afraid to niche down. Have a goal as to why you're there and what you're doing, and, and then take it from there. I agree. Yeah, I think that's very sensible.
Yeah, and as B and Charlie said, I think that the long-term play is to just be a member of the community, right? And if you're a good member and you're contributing and you're learning, you'll become, a deeper part of it. I think we all see those examples of the Twitter storm of the, wow, I posted this one thing and now I've got a million followers, but that's not the reality. Like that is the rare occasion that something like that happens. It's about, as these guys have said, consistency, regular, being very forthright, being authentic. And I think that, if you do so, people will be attracted to you. And then, you have the opportunity to provide more knowledge and more relationships. So,
And just going back to the authenticity, it's to, I think, to avoid straying into areas of politics, avoid straying into chatting about the football scores and the like, and to be, good humored and avoid getting into arguments or spats. Whilst some of the algorithms will promote, in the end, what you want to build is an audience who's with you for the right reasons. And I think if you're true to yourself in that sense, that makes a big difference. So I tend to stay very well clear of anything to do with politics or sport or anything else like that. And just to keep certainly on Twitter, this to be very much around my niche, my area of inflammatory bowel disease.
Excellent. Thank you so much. That is all the time that we have today. If you asked a question that we did not get to, the Acceleration Point team will follow up with you via email. I'd like to thank our speakers, Viet Le, Charlie Lees, and Scott Thompson for a great discussion today. We really appreciate you taking the time to share your insights and expertise with us. I'd also like to thank you, our audience, for joining us today.